Okay, Dan, we're ready to get started whenever you are.
Copy that. Hi, everybody. Introductions. Let's go around the room. Are we calling on people to do the introductions for that?
Actually, first, Dan, if we could do the administrative announcement.
Well, there is that too. This is a public meeting subject to public meeting law, and it'll be digitally recorded. Deliberation of issues will only be conducted by the Telecommunications Policy Committee members, unless permitted by the chair. Remember to always state your name for the record. For cases dealing with denial or revocation, only information contained in the staff report can be considered once the staff report is adopted. Assumptions, outside knowledge, or personal experiences should not be included in any discussions. Individuals who engage in disruptive behavior that impedes official business will be asked to stop being disruptive or leave the meeting. Additional measures may be taken to have disruptive individuals removed if their continued presence poses a safety risk to the other persons in the room or makes it impossible to continue the meeting.
Thank you, Chair Linzen, just for Susie Herring for the record. Thank you for reading that, but there's an error on the agenda stating Telecommunications Policy Committee, and it's supposed to be Private Security Private Investigator Policy Committee members. So just for the record.
Oh, and that's what this is from.
Huh. It's all right. There. Appreciate that.
So do we have one for this committee?
It's okay.
That's the agenda. Is it close?
Same building. When you have introductions?
Yep, and then we can go ahead and start introductions. When I call on you, please state your name and who you're representing for the record. And then we'll start with you, Chair Lenzen.
Hi, Dan Lenzen, representing private security industry.
Vice Chair Hazenkamp.
Jeremy, can you hear me? I was having audio issues earlier. Okay. Jeremy Hazenkamp. I'm on the DPSST board representing private security.
Thank you. Member Berg.
Good afternoon. Ken Berg, representing the manufacturing industry.
Member Bauer.
Good afternoon. Ben Bauer, representing armed security providers.
Member Nakasone.
Good afternoon. Nate Nakasone, representing unarmed.
Member Schultz.
Good afternoon. Matthew Schultz, representing healthcare.
Member Snyder.
Helena Snyder, representing private investigators, OSB appointed.
And Member Stone.
Alex Stone, hospitality.
Thank you. And then now for staff introductions, Juan Lopez, Executive Assistant, DPSST.
Carissa White, Compliance Investigator, DPSST.
Michelle Morrison, Compliance Investigator with DPSST. Jennifer Howell, DPSST.
Kevin Hupline, DPSST.
Susie Herring, DPSST.
Michael Hulsapple, DPSST.
Emma Detweiler, DPSST. Chantal Haas, DPSST. Sherry Elward, DPSST.
John Graham, Ground Government Security. Sam Tanny, DPSST.
Okay, that concludes introductions.
Okay, Dan Lenzen, for the record, we're looking for an approval for the October 15th meeting minutes.
Chair Linzen, there are no minutes for this meeting.
Copy that.
Based upon the timeline from the previous meeting to now, those will be presented at the next meeting.
Okay, copy that. Daniel Lenzen, for the record, then we turn it over to you, Susie Herring.
Thank you very much. Susie Herring for the record. I welcome everybody today to this meeting. As you saw when you looked at the agenda, that there were no voting items other than potentially those minutes, but we don't have those today. I'm structuring this meeting a little bit different and facilitating this rather than the chair today. because we would like to have a different style of a meeting based upon our last meeting that we had and some of the key suggestions that came up. And since we didn't have any agenda items, I determined that this was a meeting of goodwill to meet with everybody and hopefully learn and listen from you all. And so I'm just going to read an introduction and then I will kind of explain the layout for today. And as you'll see through the introductions, most of my staff is here today. So they are also here to offer any answers to questions that people might have and incorporate them into some of the conversations that we're having. So I will read what I've prepared. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. The purpose of the meeting is to create a space where we can share and listen and ensure that all the suggestions we are able to get through today are thoughtfully organized and prioritized. By sharing and gathering everyone's input, we aim to identify the most critical issues or opportunities and determine which ones should take precedence as we move forward. This allows us to ensure that every voice is heard and that we collectively align on the important next steps. Through clear organization and thoughtful prioritization, we can ensure that our efforts are focused on the areas that will have the greatest impact, allowing us to make information and strategic decisions. I want to stress that this meeting is not just about reviewing the past, but also about ensuring that we're setting ourselves up for success and moving forward. It's a chance for everyone to contribute, to ask questions, and to further thoughts or suggestions. So if there are areas that need more discussion or clarification, today will be the time to bring those up and we'll add those to our list. Our goal today is to ensure that we've captured all the important aspects that have been mentioned, and we've clarified any points that might need more attention, and we've created an environment where every voice is heard and valued. This is a space for open dialogue, and if there's anything that didn't quite resonate last time, or if new ideas have emerged, I encourage you all to speak up. We want to make sure that every perspective is considered as we move forward together. I have a specific time allowance that for each agenda item, so we'll use that time efficiently to review and discuss the key suggestions that have been shared, and we'll work to stay on track and respect the time limit, but also make sure that the discussion remains open and thorough. If any issues require additional time than allowed, we will park those issues, address them at the next meeting, as we're limited to our 2 hours today. The objectives for the meeting are straightforward. We will go over some key items previously suggested, prioritize suggestions, and talk about the next steps. I'm confident that this meeting will help us clarify our path forward and ensure that we will continue to work together effectively towards our shared goals. So with that, we're going to dive in, and I look forward to hearing all your feedback and continue this productive conversation. So thank you again for all of your participation and your time today. Before I get on to number 4 agenda item, I wanted to ask, because I had 2 other staff members that should be participating online, to introduce themselves. Are Coy and Steve online? And if so, if you could introduce yourself.
My name's Steve Heisinga, Learning and Development Specialist, DPSST.
Thank you.
My name is Coy Alexander, Learning and Development Specialist, DPSST.
Great, thank you. Okay, so agenda item number 4, we have an informational video for you. So committee members, this kind of came out of just making sure that the members understand who we have working for us and the work that they do. And it's a quick little fun video of like what the day in the life of working in our program. And so we'll play that now. And then again, I have staff here that will be prepared to maybe answer some follow-up questions that are related to that, or anything that comes up related to the duties that they're doing, and then we'll move on from there. So we've got about 10 minutes right now with this video, and potential 10 minutes for question and answering, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the DPSST Private Professional Certification and Licensing Program. We begin our day by checking the calendar of duties, which tells us who will be running credit cards, entering fees in the deposit log, covering lunch duty, or opening mail. The first task each morning is printing certifications and licenses that were issued the prior day. After cards are printed, we create address labels and hand the materials to reception, who put them together for mailing. We then begin checking credit cards and checks that were received the previous day. We check each applicant's certifications and deficiencies to make sure that fees are needed. If a check must be mailed back because it is a personal check, an overpayment, or the fee is not needed, we first create a letter explaining why and what is needed from the applicant. We scan the envelope and check and attach that printout to the
Ken Burke,
application
for
our
the record, there
records.
is no sound if there's supposed to be.
After checking each application, we begin running credit card payments.
That's too long. I'm gonna check and see if everybody else feels that way too.
So Ken Burke spoke up and said there was no audio. Was there any audio for anyone else online?
No.
No.
Negative.
Was there video?
What's that?
Was there video?
Yeah, there was video, but I don't know why there was no audio on the Teams end.
Okay. Stand by. Let me just join the meeting and then I can take the thumb drive and share it from my screen.
Sometimes through Microsoft Teams, you have to select sound in order to present.
Yeah, and it's a very small little toggle switch. I miss it all the time.
I just gotta make sure.
Echoing.
I do a little.
Juan, can you email IS? Please.
Just got some.
Test. Yeah, it's not coming online either. Stand by. Scott,
Zach's coming down.
No. I'm gonna stop sharing.
It's on Susie's now. She has the speaker.
Here, I'll give it to you.
Was this need to be scanned or?
No.
It just wasn't displaying any audio. It was sharing, but they couldn't hear anything on their end.
Through Teams.
Yeah.
Okay. Matt?
Try this. Ribbit. And now we can. Okay. Alright, go ahead and give it a go.
Hello, and welcome to the DPSST Private Professional Certification and
Were you able to hear that, those online?
Just hear people talking.
And yeah, do that one. Bring up the video. And hit play.
Hello, and welcome to the DPSST Private Professional Certification and License.
Can you guys hear it?
No.
They're not getting any other.
Yeah.
Share sound.
Yeah.
Try the middle.
Licensing program. We begin our day by checking the calendar of duties, which tells us
Yeah.
All right, now that the video is working, we will start it over for you.
And everybody remembers where that button was.
Thank you so much for your patience.
Got it.
Ready?
Hello, and welcome to the DPSST Private Professional Certification and Licensing Program. We begin our day by checking the calendar of duties, which tells us who will be running credit cards, entering fees in the deposit log, covering lunch duty, or opening mail. The first task each morning is printing certifications and licenses that were issued the prior day. After cards are printed, we create address labels and hand the materials to reception, who put them together for mailing. We then begin checking credit cards and checks that were received the previous day. We check each applicant's certifications and deficiencies to make sure that fees are needed. If a check must be mailed back because it is a personal check, an overpayment, or the fee is not needed, we first create a letter explaining why and what is needed from the applicant. We scan the envelope and check and attach that printout to the application for our records. After checking each application, we begin running credit card payments. Payment information is entered manually as our emails regarding declined or partial payments. Credit card numbers are then shredded immediately after being run. We print 2 receipts, one for business services and one for us, which are then attached to the original credit card form and application for our records. The depositor then enters the checks and credit card payments into our deposit log. Upon completion, the log is taken upstairs to business services. This whole process can take 3 to 4 hours depending on the volume. Applications are then placed into a queue for processing. Initials are written next to applications on the deposit log to sign them out and track where they are. Next to the applications is another cabinet where we keep deficiency corrections and paperwork that is received without fees. When applications are completed, They are placed in a daily folder for record keeping. These are stored in the file room. This is also where case files are kept and where documents for records requests are retrieved. Aside from processing applications, there are many tasks which are repeated throughout the day, such as printing documents and responding to emails. The number of files in an email determines how long the process takes, as each attachment must be opened individually for printing and collating. Phone calls and walk-in visitors are another constant that must be continuously attended to. Dozens of phone calls and many visitors are fielded each day. We do our best to answer any questions and assist our constituents as much as possible. One important daily duty is opening mail. Mail is opened, date-stamped, sorted, and distributed to the appropriate individuals. Depending on the volume, this process can take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours to perform. PS-23s are also handed off to Suzanne at reception for updating personal and employment information. Now let's discuss the teams within these programs and some of their duties. The processors are responsible for entering applications for private security professionals. This includes entering information, running background checks, sending deficiency notices, and administratively terminating applications that fail to resolve deficiencies within 21 days. Each PS6 and PS20 also requires the processor to verify that the manager and instructor listed is licensed to fill out those forms or teach the course. The processors also print documents that are emailed in and are the primary respondents for phone calls and emails. The processor team is comprised of Autumn, Caleb, and Mary Lou, and each of them has special tasks in addition to those listed above. Autumn checks fingerprint cards before sending them to Oregon State Police. Caleb handles records requests and file purging, and Mary Lou takes care of supply orders and gov delivery messages. The compliance team, Chantel, Sherry, Carissa, and Michelle, has a broad range of responsibilities that includes reviewing background checks for discretionary and mandatory review, performing compliance checks, conducting investigations, contacting courts and arresting agencies, working with the Department of Justice, reviewing complaints, and ensuring providers and investigators are following Oregon administrative rules and statutes. The private security entity team, made up of Michael and Ben, is responsible for processing and issuing entity licenses and temporary authorization forms. They also work compliance cases on entities who are not licensed or fail to meet the character, competence, and reliability requirements found in Oregon law and rule. Emma handles the private investigator, manager, and instructor applications. She also coordinates trainings for instructors, notifies armed applicants of annual training requirements, and handles armed suspensions. Steve is our learning and development specialist. Some of his tasks include instructor audits, approval of remote teaching authorizations, instructing all instructor courses, ongoing review of instructor and professional manuals, and the certified instructor demonstration reviews. Coy is our technology training specialist. He works with subject matter experts to create online training content and administers the Workday learning management system that Oregon uses to present and track online learning. And finally, we have our program manager, Susie. Susie oversees everyone, providing daily assistance and making sure everything runs smoothly. To give you an idea of the volume of work we do, here are some quarterly statistics.
Give them time to read it.
We hope this video has been informative and leaves you with a better understanding of all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes to keep our state safe. Thank you for watching.
All right. Thank you for watching that. Do any of the committee members have any comments, questions, feedback?
Member Nakasone?
Nakasone, for the record, maybe this will come up in later discussions, but I just keyed into the mention of walk-in visitors. And I was wondering how many of those and what kind of strain that puts on workflow are occurring on the regular.
Yes, I can answer that for you. Don't believe it was on the actual last slide, but we keep track of each quarter of walk-ins that we have, and the last quarter was 143 walk-in individuals, and that's for a 3-month period.
Chair Lenzen?
Dana Linson, for the record, and thank you very much for putting that all together. Actually, it was very amazing to see some of the behind the scenes look. Sometimes this operation is a little bit faceless, and on the instructor side, we teach, but we don't know what it looks like that's happening when y'all are doing that. So I think it really, really is helpful, and maybe one of those opportunities to have something like that on the department page of a day in the life, without specific, maybe for an opportunity to be able to say on this quarter in 2024, it looked like this, updated every now and then. But I just want to say thank you very much for putting that together, because I know these things are not always the quickest, and it's very helpful to see those things. And I hope others feel similar in that when we can see behind the curtain and see the humans actually doing the work, the value of seeing those people doing that, I think for me, it makes me more appreciative of everybody on the staff. So thank you.
Sure.
Member Snyder?
I just wanted to say thank you as well for doing that. And I do understand that there's, what I saw too was a lot of paper, and was wondering to find out, is there thoughts and process? And I see smiles as far as, trying to maybe automate this a little bit more, even from, from my perspective as a licensee, filling out the forms and having to mail everything in is, it's time consuming for everybody, and wondered if there's maybe more or thoughts about looking into making it maybe more automated or online to alleviate some of that paper. But thank you again for putting that together. I appreciate it.
Sure. And I can answer that for you, Elena. So we are currently looking at a system that would allow for online submission. It's actually ends up being more or less kind of like a template online that an individual would fill out, and then it would be submitted. However, there would still be a check and balance of a person before that information could be entered into Skills Manager, but it would just be sent to us differently, like almost in a spreadsheet style of everything that was submitted that day. The other option that we're looking at as well is, I was just made aware of this recently, is that we will be moving away from our fillable forms that we have online. To my understanding, that we need to be in compliance with ADA, and that excludes us from using those forms. So I don't know if any of you have been to the website and seen the online complaint submission, where you can go in and type, and there's some drop-down boxes, and submit a complaint. That's potentially how those fillable forms will look, and maybe move to the transition of getting that automated as well to be able to submit applications. So we've got options. Nothing is going to be immediate. I think the transition on the fillable forms for Adobe, we have to be in compliance at, I think, the end of next year. And so the IT department is looking at this agency hopefully being in compliance mid-year next year. So one way or another, things are going to happen with that. Any other questions before we move on?
We have Member Bauer.
Ben Bauer for the record. I just wanted to piggyback off of what Helena said. And yeah, thank you guys all for doing everything that you do. It's a lot of work processing all that stuff. Speaking from experience, I run 2 organizations, a nonprofit and a for-profit, and I started out running everything on paper and learned very quick that that's extremely time consuming. So I definitely understand the amount of effort that goes into that and the need for digitalization and just how much it can streamline. I'm also an EMT, and I've been an EMT for over a decade, and I'm a training officer on the EMS side. So one of the things we do for the National Registry of Emergency Medical Technicians is for managing your certifications is an online portal. And each organization has a training officer. So when we have to renew somebody, they submit their stuff, the training officer reviews it, and then it goes in to NREMT for them to review. And so I was thinking on the security side, you could have something similar with the executive managers. So when someone has to renew, it goes to the executive manager logs into that portal, they can see and then submit it to you guys. And that might help make sure things are more accurately submitted correctly. And that way would help decrease deficiencies and also staff time for you guys to have to correct issues. So I don't know how feasible that would be or if that's possible with the system you guys are looking at, but I just know on the EMT side, it works really good. And they've been using that system now for, gosh, probably almost a decade since when I first got certified.
Okay, and I'll answer to that, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item. So for the one company that we're looking at, they have a lot more options than we do with the current system that we have. However, we are kind of limited to what their capabilities are. And that's something that we could ask them. One conversation that we have had with them, Ben, is that the instructor could go into the portal and enter that we would have to receive PS6s that you would go enter that you trained on this date and these individuals were your student, and then you would go in and submit it, and that employers would be able to do the same thing with the employment history. Viewing the application, that wasn't something that came up, but it's certainly something that we could ask because I think that would be helpful with issuing temporary work permits. But I'll ask the question and I'll have more to provide you some feedback at a later date, okay?
Ben Bauer for the record. Yeah, sounds good. I was just thinking too, because the executive managers are responsible for compliance for their entities. So if they were directly involved in that approval process, it might help streamline things. So sounds good.
Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next agenda item. I've allotted 50 minutes for that agenda item. And I'll bump ahead so we can kind of track where we're at with things. And then I've got 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. So hopefully we can get through all of this because we're already at 2:05. So the next agenda item is discussion of previous suggestions. So I had gone through and re-listened to the meeting from last time and from previous meetings, and also gathered some feedback that I've heard over time through emails. We also had a customer service survey, and I collected some of that information. So what I'd first like to do is answer some of the questions that I wasn't able to answer in the last meeting, and then kind of move into those key suggestions. But I don't want to get too deep into them. If you have some that you've been thinking about since the last meeting and that you would want to share with us today, but I will take the first couple minutes and just go over a few things that came up at the last meeting. One of the questions that was asked was regarding about if we had checked with other states outside our state, like quantity wise, what that looked like and how many constituents they were serving. So for PIs in California, it was approximately 5,000 and over 300,000 in California. And Washington PIs, they actually license agencies in Washington as well as the individual. There was 1,000, I got very specific numbers from Washington. Thank you very much, Washington, if you're watching. 1,066 PIs and 503 PI agencies. As far as security guards, they look very similar to us, 18,940. And then their entities are a lot lower, 393. And for a grand total of 20,902 constituents that they serve for the equivalency of what we do here. And then I also ran the numbers for the active certifications that we have. So for to date for PI, I had quoted 700 to 800 at the last meeting. We actually have 918 PIs that are actively certified right now. And then for private security, we have 19,055 unarmed professional certifications, plus another 7,949 other certifications, the other professionals, managers, and instructors, for a total of 27,004 certifications. And there's about 1,000 plus of those that are people that are holding multiple certifications. So the actual individuals is 25,055 individuals. So just giving you guys an some questions about, I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time discussing the fee increase or that, because we do have the public comment period. But there was another question that came out of that. I think it was Nate had brought this up at the last meeting about out-of-state companies. And I wasn't able to provide that information at the last meeting. And we have a total of 12 out-of-state companies that have 100 or more employees. But I also kind of did the math of how many companies we have, and I'll just break this down. We have 20 that are, 20 that are 100 and less, 8 that are 200 and less, 6 that are 300 and less, 1 that's 500 or less, and 3 that are 1,000 or less. So a total of 38 active companies that have more than 100 employees. So back to the conversation about our biggest entity group is really small businesses. There are very few that fall into that category as mentioned here. Okay. Any questions to anything that I've mentioned thus far? Dan?
So, Dan Linson for the record. That's a lot to process. Thank you. So for clarification and edification, if I'm going to do a scale of people, of entities in state and out of state, am I seeing it in state there's more entity licenses?
Yes.
Okay. And then of those entities that then employ humans, then it is more in-state employed. Well, going back up to the humans being employed that live in the state of Oregon or work in the state of Oregon, that work for out of state. So that's less than in, is that correct?
As far as individuals, I didn't run it by individual providers, if that's what you're asking. I just ran it by the entities, the companies where they're based out of. That I didn't do, I can get numbers, see what that looks like. I mean, it would be just based off the most current address that we have of the individual to know whether or not we have a lot of people living in Washington but working in Oregon, if that's what you're stating and I'm understanding.
Dan Linson for the record. I guess what would probably simplify this is, where are the checks being generated, in state or out of state?
So the ones that I listed, there were 12 companies that the checks are being generated outside of the state.
Or for about 100 or so employees each?
Say that again?
For about 100 or so employees each, is that what you said?
100 plus. So if a company has 100 or more employees, I ran reports on that, and there was 12 of those companies that were out of state.
Okay.
Another question that was asked at that meeting, I think it was by Nate, about the percentage of businesses that had closed, and unfortunately, we are not able to run any type of report in the system that we have to capture that information, as our companies are just active and inactive, and I can't even pull numbers of like when we made them inactive. So I'm not going to be able to get that data that was asked about for that specific question. Okay. Can't tell who that is.
Vice Chair Hazenkamp?
Yeah, Jeremy Hazenkamp for the record. Question on that then, is that, I guess my question is, people have branches, but are we looking at whether they're foreign entities? Is there any way to look at foreign entities versus actually registered in state, meaning a state of Oregon entity or a foreign entity registered in Oregon to do business?
I'm going to have Michael answer that because he deals with our entity afterwards.
So for most of the out-of-state entities that we have, the majority of them are from Washington, doing business in the Portland metro area, if we're talking physical security. The other large group that we have are alarm monitor companies based throughout the country. We have them in Texas, Florida, New York, and other areas like that that employ monitors that monitor alarms that are in the state of Oregon. So those companies are included in that as well. We have just a few companies from California that are reaching into Oregon and the Southern Oregon area. But I would say the vast majority are from Washington because they're right there at the Portland metro area. So they're based or located in Clark County or above that area and doing business down into the metro area, or the alarm monitors. The alarm monitor companies are ones that hire a large number of people based way far away from Oregon, but are monitoring alarms that are in the state.
Okay, I guess more of my, because there's some, we have, I mean, a perfect example is Garda, right? They're an international company, Garda, Allied Universal, some of these major corporations that are worldwide, I guess, Securitas, things like that. So those are the ones I'm, curious as to if I would imagine that they obviously have to be registered in Oregon to do business. But the question is, are they registered as a foreign entity, or are they, registered as the Secretary of State as a native Oregon corporation? That's kind of what I'm more asking, I guess.
Specifically, I'm not sure on the bigger corporation. I think most of them have an Oregon address.
Well, we
are registering. But we.
And Vice Chair Hazenkamp for the record, and I guess, yes, everybody's going to have an office in Oregon. However, the corporate structure of the main corporation is based in another state or country. I guess that's my question. Are we looking at that, or are we just looking at whether they have list their Oregon office as whether they're an in-state or out-of-state? I'm more interested in the Secretary of State filings as to whether they're a foreign entity or if they're a state entity.
Jeremy, we'll have to look into that and get back to you on that. But the ones that I was looking in that I said were out of state, that's the location that we have for the business. They may have offices in Oregon, but the location that we communicate with them is out of state, those 12 that I mentioned. But we'll come back at a later date and be able to answer that question for you.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, that's my main question would be, are they a foreign entity registered as to do business? versus just having a location that they put the business information at, because two
Yeah.
different things, obviously. Just because they have an Oregon location doesn't mean they're an Oregon-based business. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, got it.
So before we go on, we need to address a question in the chat. There was a discussion on how many of the private security providers are employed by an out-of-state company. And they were discussing based on the math of 12 out-of-state companies employing 100 or more, it would be 1,200.
No, the company itself is out of, like, the address location that we work with, that company is out of state. Like, I'll just use Securitas as an example. And their location that we communicate with them is in Vancouver, Washington. But I would say 95% or 85% of their employees are living in the state of Oregon. So we can't go off of just those numbers that I was giving you. I was just quoting the out-of-state companies and how large those out-of-state companies are and how many employees they have, not stating that those employees are living in or out of the state. I did not compute that information in that tally.
Ben Bauer, for the record, point of clarification. I think what we're looking for is how many people are employed by companies that are out-of-state entities versus how many are employed by companies that are inherently based in this state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the information that I was giving you. Okay. All right, moving along, I can go through my list that I've accumulated unless somebody has a hot topic that they wanted to bring up to discuss or ask myself, ask any team member here, or I can go through the items that I continue to see come up. Hearing none, okay, I will move on. Okay, one of the items that was brought up, and some of this is I'm seeking further clarification too from the members. So one of the items was brought up about taser, baton, or citizen's arrest endorsement. And again, Nate, I think that might have been you that was suggesting that. And my clarifying question would be asking you, were you suggesting that as just a regulatory function, or were you suggesting that as like a revenue draw for the program?
Both. Right now, there's no additional certification needed for carrying devices like those. So I was suggesting a system where the officer would basically buy the certifications or endorsements that they would need for the specific job that they're filling. Someone who's watching a garage gate or, swiping trucks into an access card from a booth is not going to carry all of those tools, whereas a hands-on officer in an urban area may need those things. They would pay a little bit more for that. I think there would be more revenue generated based on that, but then the initial certification costs could be kept lower for those who don't need those additional tools.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Member Schultz?
Matt Schultz for the record. Just a sidebar off what Nate said. I think also from a standardization of training aspect, I've seen a lot of contract security with tasers versus those who've gone through Axon programs, and the training that they receive is far different. So just from a standardization standpoint across the board, it's not a bad idea to look at it.
All right. Thank you.
Chair Lenzen?
Dan Lenzen for the record. With what these two gentlemen are referring to, two items come to mind. Looking at a potential tier of certifications from basic to endorsement to add endorsement, add endorsement, add endorsement. That has been bounced around. And then also other conversations that I have had with other members of this group as well as others that are related. Some of these private security unarmed, they go to the 511 store and they buy everything on the shelf. And even those that are certified armed, they've got 6 magazines, and then they're working in a urban area as if zombie apocalypse is going to pop out and they're going to need to use all rounds. And I think I think a lucid person would think that's too much stuff for a private security person, and then contrary to that would be just the visual deterrent could help a private security officer. I guess for these conversations, do we need to enter into the conversation if somebody's going to have all that stuff on them? One, their med pack, the Band-Aids are 4 years old, and they'll never use their all the bullets in their magazines, and their maces expired. Do we need all of these things on every private security officer? So I'm going to enter that as a generic question, and I know a lot of people have thought this, and I'm voicing it. So enter this into the conversation.
For the interest of time, let's just have everyone speak to that if they have any additional comments, and we can always bring this to another meeting. So let's start who I'm looking at on screen. Nate, do you have any comment to that?
Nothing other than just to second that. I'm a proponent of a security company having the freedom to design their own look and carry the tools that they need to do the jobs that they're contracted for. But we are seeing quite a few companies that may or may not allow it. They don't necessarily endorse it, but they allow it. And it's pretty extreme from what I've personally seen in viewing other companies and what they wear.
Okay, thank you. Matt, comment to that?
No, I think I'm in agreement with what everything's been said. I mean, looking at the endorsement standpoint kind of dictates what you as an organization need to have for your employees and what they're doing. I don't think everybody needs to have a taser. I don't think everybody needs a baton, just depending on your environment that you're in. Healthcare, we don't use batons because you're in a close quarter. It's not a great idea. But tasers are a better alternative for us for our needs. But OC spray is not something we would utilize as well.
Member Bauer.
Ben Bauer for the record. Yeah, I think the ultimate solution here is having different levels of certification and or the endorsement system. Because like my organization, for instance, we specialize in supporting government partners in disaster where law enforcement oftentimes is not real available. And so we train our agents to do things a little more hands-on and out of necessity. And so I have a training program that I've built for them based on my own law enforcement experience, but we're not required to do that. And so there are a lot of cowboys out there. And so it's hard because there are companies with legitimate need, but there's also companies that don't have that legitimate need. And so I think the best way to address that is to have a tiered system. And this is something that I've been a proponent of for a while, where you can, get as high as you need to go based on what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. A couple more, just quickly to hear from Ken.
Ken Berg for the record. I do echo everything that has already been said. You do have to rein in the cowboy companies and the cowboys. There's also an increase of the professionalism of the industry. However, either way that it goes is and could potentially be a slippery slope.
Okay, thank you. Alex? Any comments?
Alex Stone for the record. Yeah, I think it's important for guards to be able to carry a lot of different tools. Use of force looks different according to the tool you're using, and I think getting more options for lesser force or less lethal force is important. I wouldn't want to limit I wouldn't want a guard to be like, oh, well, I had to use my whatever because I didn't have, OC spray. When, they could have fought off 4 attackers with OC and walked away versus them getting jumped by 4 attackers and then having to use more force than maybe not necessarily could have been, it could have been a different scenario. Let me say it that way. The expert in this group for me is Hazenkamp. I mean, I know as a cop, I was, readily having to make many decisions on different types of force and the different tools. And so I don't know. I'm comfortable either way, but I'm okay. In our company, what we do, we have a former cop and he trains people and they're certified with Taser and OC or Saber and baton. And so we take people through different regiments. And, I want people to do what they're comfortable with. So anyway.
Thank you. Helena, do you have any comments?
Nope, kind of not my industry, so.
It's all fair. Jeremy, really quickly, and we'll move on to the next one if you have any comments in addition to what's already been said.
I do think there needs to be some sort of tiered certification. Do I think that you're going to endorse every less lethal tool? I think that is problematic. I think that some of the big ones, in general, I'm not a huge fan of private security carrying batons in general, and just based on what we are doing. I think there's more effective tools out there, but that's personal and company preference. I think that other less lethal tools, I would like to see something along that lines. I think there's people out there purporting that they're a hands-on company or can do this and can do that, and their folks are not properly trained. I think was very evident when we look at the Lowe's incident, and the level of training they have for what they're carrying. And but as Ken said, it's a slippery slope. Do we start mandating that as a government entity, or do things take care of themselves when they find themselves on the other side of lawsuits and things of that nature? I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts on it.
Good conversation. We're not going to solve any problems today, but this will continue to be on the list that we can come back and have conversations about this. Just sought some clarification on what was brought up before. I want to bring Helena to the conversation. So I have probably about 3 on here. We talked about the PI ethics and Steve being available to potentially offer continuing education to those PIs. Did you have any further comments after digesting that from the meeting, or any other suggestions that you'd like us to hear about that?
I think when we talked about it from the last meeting, it was my idea. What you had brought up the ethics, but just opportunities for PIs as far as training is concerned. There's one organization, maybe 2 locally that, could support and offer training for us. And we have to have a certain number of hours. So being able to have DPSST even promote or offer training for PIs so that we can get our CE that's required, every other year would be helpful. Ethics is one of them, but we have how many other hours we have to come up with as well.
Sure. And I would hope, and maybe if you're part of the OWALI organization, share this information, but our agency, when we do see trainings that are available to investigators or those that we feel like would apply to them, we will send out those trainings out on our Gov Delivery so the individuals are able to see that. They might not be put on by DPSST, but a hosting agency is notifying DPSST, and it's going out on the training division side, and then we see that and then promote it on our end to the private investigators. And sometimes we have some that we see for higher education as well, and we'll put out those on the private security Gov Delivery message too. So there are some, but they're not necessarily hosted by DPSST, but I appreciate your feedback on that, and we can work with Steve on some of that. You also had mentioned an internship opportunities for PIs or provisionals that needed continuing education. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Really not from this, well, not from the CE side, but with more from the provisional side. It was, I think when we were talking about, of course, the licensing fees, my thought process with that was almost potentially keeping it as the provisional or making it even a separate licensing classification to where we could have somebody under our wing from an internship side so that they can learn whatever side, whatever aspect within our industry that they want to gain additional knowledge on that could also contribute to their hours from the provisional side. And it would also I would see it bringing in more licensees potentially as well, but then giving them a discounted rate.
Okay.
Does that help clarify it all?
Yes, it does, but it brings me to one more question.
Sure.
The customer service survey feedback that we received, there were quite a few PIs that had mentioned that they would prefer that DPSST did some investigative training. And I was curious if you knew about that, the comments that were made, because it seemed like some of them were pretty consistent. And of course, we don't actually do any official training for PIs. They come to us with either their education or experience, and then they take the exam with DPSST. And I was just curious if you had heard any of that in your industry and maybe could share that more by chance.
I haven't heard of that myself. However, I guess it goes back to even the last discussion we were having about continuing education and opportunities as far as that's concerned too. Yeah, it's hard for me. I haven't had anybody bring it up to me specifically in that regard.
That's okay. Maybe just keep eyes and ears open, and if you hear anything, I would love feedback on that. That would be great.
No worries there.
Thank you so much. I have still quite a few things on here. We still have some time, but I also wanted to take an opportunity to share some things with the committee members too, that I think sometimes we think you know this and you might not know this. And it became apparent in the last meeting when we were talking about the different programs and the governing statutes for those programs and where the fees come for those specific programs and how things are paid. And so I'm hoping people left with a better understanding of what that looks like. I know Jennifer and I were having conversations about maybe what the future looks like for PIs and private security and any ability that we would be able to make with the legislature to potentially combine that. I don't even know what that would look like, but that is something that we can entertain that conversation. The other thing that I wanted to mention is sharing with the committee members too. So we go through this process that we evaluate our budget and what we need to have as far as revenue coming in for our expenditures. But then I believe it's annually, please you guys correct me if I'm wrong, that we also have to do a reduction package that we offer to the governor, and it comes from this agency. So we actually have to look at within our own programs where we can take cuts if we were designated to do so. And there ends up being different groups where we propose a 5%, a 5%, and 10%. Luckily, our program has never had to fall under that reduction package because we pretty much sustain ourselves as being a fee-based program. But that's something that I didn't think that the committee's members were aware that is something that this agency does in addition to reviewing the budget annually. So I wanted to share that. Any questions yet before I move on? I think there's some chat stuff and I don't know if I'm still. Sorry, I'm gonna pause as I'm reading the chat here. Okay, so this is still relates to, okay, the previous discussion. Okay. Noted, I've got your comment there, Ben, noted, and I will include that in the information that I noted. Let's see. There was one question I wanted clarification on, and this was for Ken Berg. We were talking about, like I said, I really didn't want to go down the fee increase conversation, but I just wanted to seek clarification on this. I believe the comment was made that the person would have to work 3 days to pay for their certification fee, and I wanted, maybe you could tell me a little bit more about that.
Yes, Ken Berg for the record. At the time of the last conversation we had regarding this, I quickly did some math. And in order to pay instructor fees coupled with increased fees proposed by DPSST, a standard security officer making minimum wage, and I know it's obviously dependent upon where in Oregon they work, would literally have to make about 3 days' wages to pay for that increased fee that is assessed by DPSST, coupled with instructor costs, etc.
Okay, thank you. I don't think at the time the mention of instructor fees were included in that, so that makes more sense to me. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Another point to share and answer for you. We were talking about legal fees at the last meeting, and I just wanted to share with you, anytime that we reach out to our general counsel or we work on any sort of criminal cases, violation cases, rules that we have to have them review, notices, notice of violations, anytime we send anything over to DOJ, we're paying that attorney a fee, and it has gone up, and that's one piece that I don't think that we had realized that was apparent to the increase in our legal fee costs. So they are charging us $275 an hour for any time that we reach out to them. So, there's times where staff can ask a question and it might be, an email back and forth and it's 15 minutes worth. But when we have criminal cases or investigation cases, there's a lot of time that Michelle and Carissa spend with these attorneys, either pre-conference hearings or the hearings that we have, or preparing notices, contacting witnesses, that those legal fees do really, really add up. And so I wanted to make sure that I follow back up on that and answer that question for you. Let's see. I also wanted to share with you, we talked about the website a little bit, and we also had the website listed on our customer service survey of how people felt, how user-friendly the website was, and maybe suggestive improvements for the website. And so we're looking at what that could be, but I also wanted to share with the committee members to help you understand that the website makeup, or what is the word I'm looking for, like a template of it, we're required to have it look a certain way. So there's certain things that we can do and there's certain things that we can't do. And Sherry's the main person that facilitates all of our web pages, and I would encourage any feedback, even at a later date, from committee members. I want to encourage you to share with me if it's not user-friendly or things that you can see for improvement. We're looking at within our limits, making updates to that. And in addition to that, we're also I'm having conversations with Department of Treasury to potentially look at doing online payments through our website, which I think would be very beneficial to the constituents. So working through that would actually probably save some time on the processors, as you saw in the video of them working through the day, processing those credit card payments so people could pay for that online. So working through that. Let's see. Another one. This one, again, I'm going to go back to Nate. You had requested a long-term economic package, and I know we had some conversations about reporting out to you committee members at each quarterly meeting where we are with the budget, and then bringing that information on that odd year when we're evaluating the budget and looking at that narrative of what potentially we may need to do with fee increases. So Nate, could you tell me if there was anything else that you were hoping to have with that?
Nakasone for the record. It was really just a suggestion of projecting the costs out so that we can see fee increases coming, and then you could potentially implement lesser fee increases. These current round of increases are pretty steep, especially on the investigator side. And I think you said it was 2006 or so that there hadn't been an increase there. So rather than just kind of, jacking them up, $100+ or whatever the investigator one, the rest of them are pretty steep too. Looking at a long-term projection over 10, 20 years even as to where the economy's going, and, looking at how we as the industry bring new people into the industry, and then projecting out smaller increases, maybe a 1% increase per year or something like that over time, rather than a 20+% increase when needed.
Okay, thank you. And also it came up at the meeting about completing the ARMED curriculum. Do we still have Steve online with us? Maybe you can give an update on that.
We do. This is Steve Huizinga for the record. Obviously, it's a large undertaking with lots of different elements, but we're making solid progress. My goal would be to have it completed within the next 6 months or so.
And as committee members, you understand, we'll still have to send that to DOJ. We still would like a group of individuals to review that. Then it would be coming to the policy committee and then the board. And so there is a process for that. So it will take a little bit longer, but that's government speed for you. Let's see, Nate, you got your hand up?
Just a question on that. So I was one in the ARMED work group back when Julianne was moving through that. I'm not entirely sure where that went. I think where we kind of left off was that was going to resume at one point. So just for Steve, is that when you say in the next, however long you said, 6 months, is that something that you're finishing on your own, or what's kind of the process there? I feel like we were making good headway with Julianne towards the current curriculum back when those were happening.
Yeah, so when I arrived, I ended up doing, I guess what I would call forensic file work, and finding what was there, what wasn't, and getting a handle on the trajectory of the project. That took some time. Once I figured out the trajectory and sort of the main ideas that were captured, I just started kind of rebuilding. There wasn't a whole lot of, I think, actual writing of the curriculum down yet, but the structure was beginning to unfold. So I began to work with our experts here in the academy, and taking what I had of the input from the working committee previously into account to structure what we were building. I'm not sure if that completely answers your question, but.
Thank you. That does help, Nakasone, for the record. I do want to point out two things, just so that they're on your radar for consideration, that we had mentioned at length in the work group. And one was with the end result of an ARMED curriculum that syncs up with the other curriculums. Right now, there's a lot of overlapping content amongst the other curriculums, some contradicting content and things like that. So I think the end goal, from what I understood from Julianne, was to eventually go back and update the unarmed curriculum as well as the others, to make sure that those kind of synced up and were an efficient, kind of leading towards Dan's concept of a tiered certification process. And then two, the length of the class itself for the arms becoming longer. And I just would want to not necessarily counsel against that, but just point out that the longer you make the training, especially if you're coupling it with the unarmed, the harder it is going to be to bring business or to bring new people into the industry. If they've got to go through an unarmed class and an armed class, they potentially are looking at weeks plus of training before they could potentially hit the field and start making some money, as well as on the business side, owners having to take on new armed contracts or unarmed contracts at short notice. They've got to be able to start an employee from scratch and get them up and running pretty efficiently. So I'm definitely a favor of better training, but more training and longer training. I think we need to really be considering how efficiently we're delivering it and keeping it down to a consumable point for the employee and something that's manageable for the business as well.
Steve Heisinger, for the record, and I know others have their hand up and have other points to make. If I can briefly speak to that, I don't approach this saying, I'm going to make this a 24-hour curriculum. I'm approaching this saying, what are the things that we need to be presenting in the curriculum? What are the things that armed professionals need to know, and to what level do they need to know that? And let's build the training around that. So I haven't committed myself to an over-under time chart, just feeling like that might be an inappropriate approach given the seriousness seriousness is the right word, but given the gravity of what we're training our professionals to do out in the field, and really trying to pay attention to what good pedagogy would require to adequately teach these things. So I don't have a set timeline right now that I'm sort of modeling around. I'm building and sort of seeing what we get. So.
Jeremy, do you have a comment?
Yes, I do. Jeremy Hazenkamp, for the record. Steve, so I see you've been going through that. Is your plan to have that working group look at that before it's put to the policy committee to give input? I know some of the big things that we brought up is that this shouldn't be a basic handgun class, and a lot of this is all geared towards basic handgun, which they should come to this. This should be focused more around use of force, appropriate use of the tools. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've seen is the instructors that are teaching it can teach basic handgun stuff, but when we come to use of force and the things that are really putting light on the program, they can't teach those things. And so I'm just wondering if there's also, if that's still in the program, or what the thoughts are to getting eyes on it to help, because obviously it is a different environment than the folks down there in the firearms building. They're teaching cops, they're teaching corrections. We are also still talking about security realm, and so I don't know how many of them down there have worked in the industry as well as law enforcement. So those would be some of the questions that I have.
Steve, for the record, Heisinger, for the record. So it's an interesting question, right? Because we can't assume across the industry. Like, I know that some companies only hire former military, and some companies only hire experienced firearms users. But we can't sort of assume a baseline that everyone has prior firearms experience. So most certainly, we have to keep the basic elements in the curriculum. I would say that while that's in the curriculum, we certainly want to give more attention to threat assessment, de-escalation, and these sorts of things. So I hear your need. I don't think it's wise for us to completely remove that introductory sort of level, because we definitely have those folks becoming certified armed professionals and they need that information. But I do understand wanting to more emphasize in the training de-escalation and threat assessment and these sorts of things. So I definitely, yeah, I get that.
Well, and Steve, Jeremy has kept again for the record, but I think that the thought was that they would have to go seek other training. Getting someone to do basic firearms by some sort of instructor coming with where they come to the class with those skills can be done, doesn't have to be done by a DPSST certified instructor, right? That can be done by someone who is basic NRA or, you know, some other instructor certifications, whether it's even an instructor certification for the company. They come to the course and they have to show a certain level of proficiency, or they go back and they have to, because I mean, 24 hours, there's a lot of stuff in there that shouldn't be in there as far as for, you know, we shouldn't be teaching people how to draw and put on their holster and do all these things, right? That should be at either a company level or another class. There's lots of 2-day or 1-day basic firearms classes that geared towards that for the skill application. And so I really would like to see this focus more heavily on law, use of force, the de-escalation stuff, because that's, you know, I think you can move more people through. I can bring people in with one of my instructors who hasn't had time to be able to go through the DPSST or the WCJTC instructor course. Does that mean that they're not teaching basic firearm skills that are commensurate with what's in the industry? We can push them through a lot quicker. I can get other folks, you know, getting them up to speed to come. They show the skills. They show that they can demonstrate this stuff as they come in day one, which I think that pretty much everybody on that committee was in agreement with that there's really no reason to reinvent the wheel then. If they come to it with a basic level of proficiency, they get tested out to, if they can't complete it, they get sent away, right? So there's an understanding that they need to be able to do this when they come into the class so that we can then move forward. So that would be my ask, and even maybe revisiting with the folks what the thought was, because again, you know, do we need to have a DPSST certified instructor teaching basic firearm skills? No, we don't. There's plenty of people out there in the industry. It can be a list of people that can provide that based off of, you know, Elian's firearms instructor from either an agency or the NRA would, you know, any of the things that are requirements to get into the DPSST class. But I don't think they need to have to get in and keep a firearms certificate, you know, until they get to that class, actually teach the DPSST certified armed professional course, which I just, you know, just my take on it. I think that a lot of stuff should be handled on the company level, or they shouldn't even, if they can't pass when they come in there, they shouldn't be getting a certification. So they can go on their own and go to other stuff through the company or whatever, you know. So I understand some people do, you know, don't hire with prior experience, but I think that's also behooves a company to also, you know, it can be more cost effective for them if they can use somebody to at least get them to that, you know, the ability to demonstrate when they come to the class, saves them time with maybe an outside instructor that they have to pay to go do this. You know, it's stuff they can do. So just my 2 cents on it, and to bring that up, that was heavily weighed with the folks on, you know, with Nate on the committee. And I think we all came to that conclusion that, you know, really this should be about focusing on the things that are, you know, more important, because anybody can teach a basic firearms class, and that's not what we should have those people coming in.
Okay.
Coming in. Thank you.
You, and it sounds like you have a lot more to contribute to this, but we have a limited time, so I'm going to just kind of park that conversation that we can have at a later date with Steve and the committee members that want to contribute to that. There was a couple others that have hands up. We're running out of time for this topic. Is I see Ben, so is that something that I can include you in on as well, Ben? Or is it something different?
Yeah, this is the same topic. Although I'm not on I wasn't on the subcommittee because as the armed representative, I wasn't allowed to be on the subcommittee. I just wanted to say that might be another opportunity for a stepped approach because from my perspective, 38 hours of training is not nearly enough. My security agents have to go through 80 hours of training to be armed. And so I think a stepped approach would be good because that way, because, Nate's point is valid. You don't want to have a whole bunch of people sit through that long of a course if you don't need it. But for people like me, I would definitely need them to go through more than 24 hours. And then the second thing is an ask to Steve, if at all possible, if we could unify the qualification, because the instructors right now are going through the DPSST course, they're shooting the law enforcement qual, and then when you get to the armed course, you're shooting an entirely different qual. So in my opinion, everyone should be shooting the law enforcement qual. It's not that hard. So if there's any way we could possibly do that, I would be hugely in favor.
We'll talk about this collectively with Steve at another time because, like I said, we're running out of time. I want you to be heard. I want to make sure that I have that information noted, but we're going to have to pick that up because I can tell that this is going to be a much longer conversation. So I appreciate all the feedback and I've made that noted and we'll add that for another topic of discussion at another date, okay? Let's see. So we're at a point where I was hopeful that maybe we could make some suggestions on the things that we have talked about and setting maybe some priorities. And so the things that I had captured, one I think is very simple that Michael can get back to the group about the question on entities and whether that's registered specifically as a foreign business, I guess, with Oregon. That was one. I also had the endorsements conversation that people had brought up concerns about that. Good feedback, as well as the internship possibility. And the other one I had was related to the training for the armed as well. So those were the 4 highlights. I know I gave you a lot of information, but I was hoping that maybe we could prioritize those as a committee of how you would like the program to proceed. Like, what's the most important thing for this group that you would like us to focus on? And I'll just kind of go around if each one can provide some feedback. So Ben, Ben, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Ben Barr, for the record, I just wanted to add too, we had talked about the potential of looking into a stepped fee schedule based on company size at the last meeting. So I don't know if that's something that we're still considering, but that would be really beneficial. So for me, I think my priorities are the stepped fee schedule, the stepped training process of, different levels of training, and then the armed curriculum, kind of in that order.
Okay. Ken?
Ken Berg for the record. Actually, I'd probably echo Ben Bauer.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Nate?
I'm right there with Ken and Ben. I don't have much other than that.
Okay. Helena?
That sounds good to me.
Well, how about I ask if there's any opposition since everybody's agreeing to that order? So if there's no opposition, we could just move into some of the next steps here. And that's just what I'm able to provide you today as, a thought of where we would go with this. I do want to jump back just for 1 second on the armed conversation because I think Jeremy had asked if that information the curriculum would be going to a work group. And yes, that is a process. We vet that through a work group. It gives us time to run people through that and see how the flow of that works. And if any changes need to be made prior to us moving to the step of going to DOJ and then to the policy committee and the board. So just want to make sure that question got answered. So I'll just go down the list here. So I did not have the fee structure that Ben had talked about on my list. I know that is something that the agency had looked at in the past, so we'll bring that back up again and give some more data at the next meeting as far as what those numbers look like for the entities. And then for the endorsements, I would like to probably talk to the chair and the vice chair to determine if they would like to have like a subgroup just to discuss what those specific endorsements are that they want to look at, rather than as a committee as a whole. We're allowed to have work groups and get those people together to talk about that, which then could then in turn bring that back to this work group, or excuse me, back to this policy committee. And then of course incorporating Jennifer, because we have to look what our statutory requirements are, and even if we have the ability to do something like that. So that would be the next step on that one. The internship piece, that's easy enough too, to work with Jennifer, making sure that we have the ability to do so within statute, and then working with Steve on what kind of opportunities we may have. And then I'd also like to circle in Samantha and Helena as well, just to vet that through them before we actually come back to the policy committee with some information on that. And then the last one, the armed, I think, like I said, we need to have another kind of side conversation about that to let everybody finish having that conversation and sharing that information that they want to with Steve about the curriculum. But he's actively working on that now and has been for a good portion of the time that he's been here, which is almost a year. And as I stated, what that process would look like with the work group and DOJ and policy committee and the board. Are there any questions about that? Next steps for our program? Helena?
Hi, Helena Snyder for the record. Is there a way that we could maybe also incorporate the PI subcommittee into the conversation with the internship?
Yeah, let me touch on that for just a minute. So the PI subcommittee, we were actually recruiting for that, and we got a few people that had applied, and then we were looking at putting that together. And of course, as you know, there's it's a 2-year commitment for each person. And I went back to look, and we hadn't even had a subcommittee in 5 years. And you're nodding your head, you know. So I didn't want to pin those people into that 2-year if we weren't going to have a meeting. And so of course we don't have a meeting unless we need a meeting. So we could definitely do that and look at that recruitment again and get individuals filled into those positions. I think it's 3 vacancies. And then we could present this to that subcommittee and look at if we actually had some administrative rules that we potentially could move forward, or a process or a procedure for that. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. It's been a while. Okay, and then the last thing I had on, or any more questions about next step? Okay, and then I will also say, before I move on to the next one, again, does anybody have any questions for staff at all? You've got their attention. This is your opportunity to ask them anything if you have. Nate?
Nakasone for the record. I hope this is appropriate, and you as employees may or may not be able to speak to this. I don't know if you have to stay neutral or not, but we've put some ideas on the table. Obviously, revenues, the overarching concern. Is there any ideas from staff on how to solve that problem, or what to do to increase that?
Compliance.
What exactly is he talking about?
increasing revenue, bringing in money. Any ideas of how to increase our revenue? I mean, I think a lot of it, Nate, I'm answering for them, has a lot to do with compliance because of civil penalties. We're seeing that with the entity side, and you know, it's unfortunate because we've got, you know, these two here working. We've got Michelle working with discretionary backgrounds. We've got Carissa doing violations, and then Sherry doing mandatory backgrounds. So it's really Carissa being the one investigator dealing with folks that are out of compliance, and
there's a lot of
her
you.
caseload is very heavy, and she's got some pretty big cases right now that consume her time. So we don't even probably have enough compliance to bring in the revenue that we would like to for civil penalties anyhow. Michelle's got a comment.
Michelle Morrison for the record, and I kind of want to speak to the opposite of that. I want you all to know that we are really considerate of your dollars and the constituents' dollars. And I personally and all of the staff, we do everything we can to mitigate expenses, especially like with the cases that I have through the Department of Justice. I make sure I do all of the work that I can so that they're not billing us for things that I can do at a much reduced cost than what they charge us, for instance.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. All right, so the last item on the agenda is just an open forum. We only have, well, we have about 20 minutes left. I had 10 minutes allotted for that, but just anything else that you would like me to add to a list that we're not going to solve any problems today, but that you'd like me to put it on a list that we can discuss at another time. I see Ben's hand went up.
Ben Barr for the record. I don't know if it needs discussion or not, but with the curriculum changes and stuff that we've been talking about, when new updates come out, would it be possible to release them in like a red letter version? So that way the changes are highlighted, so we don't have to pick through the entire curriculum to identify what has been tweaked and what hasn't. It would help us update our curriculum a lot quicker.
I think if I'm speaking to, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm speaking to the ARMED curriculum, it's going to be a completely different format than what you're used to. So it would be a brand new manual that would be released.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I mean, even with unarmed updates or anything like that, if it's not a complete revamp, but if there's some tweaks that have been made, a red letter version would just be really awesome because it is a pretty sizable curriculum to try to identify the individual changes that were made.
Okay. They do the updates. Thank you. They do, but as he said, like kind of
Trying to find it
so you can see what changes were. Nate?
Nakasone for the record, yeah, similar to Ben, and we briefly touched on it when we were talking about the armed curriculum, but the unarmed is starting to get in pretty desperate need of an update as well. I was wondering if there are any concrete plans to move to that one after the armed curriculum or in conjunction with the armed curriculum.
Steve, do you want to comment on that, or?
Steve, for the record, yes.
We are doing that.
Yes, we know.
So if I can speak, I'll get a little bit more than yes. Part of what we need, in my estimation, is not just to update the curriculum, but we need to update our instructors. Education has changed a lot in the last 10 years, and it's not just a matter of updating curriculum. We need to update the instructors to be using current cognitive and educational science informed instructional techniques. And so what's happening with the ARMED manual is that it's not just rewriting a pamphlet or a book on the ideas. It's devising strategies for teaching the content in a way that facilitates learning on the part of your students. And so there is definitely an eye towards the unarmed manual as well, and developing that into a more robust educational experience for your students. But that, of course, takes a great deal of time because now it's not just content. It's also, there will be a train the trainers thing that will need to come with the new manual. So
Thank you, Steve.
Nakasone, for the record, thank you. That answers my question. More than yes. My follow-up question would have been, okay, what are those plans then if your answer was just yes? And my second follow-up question was that, that would come with revamped training for the instructors as well. So I think you answered that. And I have been an instructor for umpteen years, and I love those instructor sciences. So feel free to use me as a resource.
Okay, I'm just going to keep going around here. Helena, do you have any comments for the open forum?
Not at this time that I can think of. No, I think everything's been addressed, but thank you.
Jeremy?
Jeremy Hazekamp for the record, thank you. I guess, my comments are surrounding both the unarmed and the armed curriculum. There's so many different instructors. You guys don't have the staff to go around and always review all of the instructors. I'd really like to see a push for the initial basic unarmed to go to an online program. That way you guys can control everything that is put out. It allows flexibility in completing modules. We already do it with the private investigator situation. And so I'd really like, we start talking about revenue, developing out a program, having people pay to take a course. I know it's going to be unpopular with some of the instructors who make their living based off of this, but I think that we can bring some both revenue in that will offset some of the licensing fees. We can control the curriculum that's put out there in a better manner. And maybe we do some hands-on days. TASER is a perfect example. They moved to all the book learning online, and then they went to a 1 day versus a full 2 or 3 day course. But I'd really like to see the department look at moving all of those things to an online process for the unarmed. And then we look at more continuing education sources like what private investigation has, so that for their 4-hour research, we're not just rehashing the same thing, that there's topics with online conversations, things that they can take through the course, provide a PS6, or I'm sorry, PS20, whatever, like a PS8 type of deal, one of those PSs that can, is one of the lists that we've approved as continuing education, and we move that way because it could be, I think that would also move people through the pipeline a lot quicker. I think there's also a lot of topics in the firearms course that could actually go to something like that, to where they can do some pre-work to shorten the in-class time that they need. So that's what I'd really like to see the department focus on is, how can we streamline education? I get it. I want to see people highly trained, but really what we need to do is ensure that we have the same stuff going forward. Everybody's getting the same material and it's taught in the same manner. And then we can deviate from there with some of these certifications and things like that. But anyway.
Thank you. Let's see. Ken, do you have any comments for the open forum?
I do. Ken Berg for the record. In relationship to Nate and Steve's conversation regarding training, I just want to piggyback on one thing that Steve did state, is it's a matter of increasing the ability and professionalism of the instructor. I recently attended Steve's last IDC, I think back in August, and I was dreading just going through the book, and it was not that at all. It was absolutely phenomenal. So a job very, very well done to Steve in increasing the integrity and professionalism of instructors.
Thank you, Ken. We appreciate that. Steve does a great job. Happy to have him. Matt, do you have any comments for the open forum? Do we still have that?
Member Schultz, are you still there?
I apologize. I was having computer issues. No comment.
Okay. Alex?
Yeah, I'd like to, number one, when it comes to fees, I know that there are companies that use, outside or non-employee executive managers. I think that there should be a fee in place for that if you don't have an in-house executive manager. I think that's one way to raise revenues, because that situation seems like it would require more focus than people that are, if you have an executive manager, that's the owner of the company that already has a working relationship with DPSST, versus, someone who's sponsoring 16 companies, right? So that would be one. And then just echoing what Hazenkamp said about getting the online course or the unarmed course online, that's phenomenal. And even maybe a portion of the armed, and so I really like that idea. I really think that would generate revenue. And, I don't want to, he's basically already outlined some great ideas, but I just want to echo, I think that's great.
Thank you.
One last thing would be, DPSST for law enforcement has great instruction already. And so I know there's a lot of material out there. I would think that some of those courses, especially even like on like the detectives course that y'all offer, a lot of that seems like it could be like put in a video format and recorded. And so I understand if cops don't want security guards in the classroom with them, whatever, right? But if it could at least be videoed and used in formats like Jeremy's talking about, I think that there'd be a lot of money to be used, a lot of revenue could be made. So that's it.
Thank you. And I want to close out with Dan, but Dan, before we get to you, I still see Jeremy's hand up. I want to make sure, did you just forget to put your hand down, Jeremy? Or did you have
I did. I was actually just going to type a quick thing. The one thing that I did want to bring up is about the people that are slipping through the cracks on entities, the companies that are quote unquote just one person, and they're 1099ing people, and then this person, one person gets a contract and they have all these little 1099s. I just think that we're missing them on their insurance and all that stuff. So I'd just like to see you guys look at that when we're expanding entity licensing to include anybody that has a company that's going to take on work from a client. Thanks.
So Michael Holzapfel for the record. The rule, the way it's wrote, is if you contract for employment, you are employing them, and they are required to license an entity, and we are holding those companies accountable for that. We have done some compliance cases, and we have sent out notices, and we have shut that down with a few companies, specifically the summer compliance checks at some of the events now where they were having contractors come in to work for them to do security events. We put our foot in the middle of that. Some companies are pushing their contractors to be licensed as executive managers. Some companies have readjusted their makeup of their business and are now employing as W-2 employees, the ones that used to do 1099s, but we are definitely focused on that.
Okay. I know when we had the entity talk, there was some people that were slipping through the cracks where they were doing the contracting thing with executive managers, and then they were their own person, but yet they were being employed by somebody who is an entity, and they still fell under the W-2. If you did the W-2 test, they should have fallen under employees. So I just wanted to see that that was being done, or we had something there that was that an entity's not just then bringing on some 1099s who have their own companies and their own executive managers.
Yeah, Michael Holzapfel, back for the record. Yes, we are definitely focused on that. We are holding companies accountable. And I can tell you that that is one of our key focuses in the entity requirements, because the entity regulation is all based on employee protection, and that's exactly what we're focused on, making sure those employees are protected.
Thank you. Okay, before I turn it over to Dan for his comments on an open forum and closing us out, I want to thank you all for your time and attention today, and sharing information, answering questions that I asked of you. I'm kind of sticking to the timelines. It's very helpful for us to get through a lot of information. So thank you so much for your cooperation with that. I really appreciate it. I will move to Dan if you want to provide us with your last comments on the open forum and close us out today.
Absolutely. Dan Lenzen for the record. And I am hoping that my Starlink, otherwise known as Skynet, is going to hold out, because that bomb cyclone is hit here. So I'm in the coast range right here. So just the global mentality that this group has is amazing in this new world, and I think it's very important where this is going. And so to all y'all that are thinking about everybody and all things, that's a challenge for this group, and the fact that we've got some amazing people doing that right now. Y'all are amazing. So that global mentality is very important for this next thing, and I'm going to say that that this group can give some guidance to moving this department into the future. Of course, the department makes their decisions and they do what they need to do, and to basically keep alive. So the department has done an amazing job in pivoting, and thank you, Susie, for doing that. This new world that we're in it needs a forward thinker, and appreciate y'all doing that. And it's and I know as a leader, you probably you're not able to do it all by yourself. And I know that you've got some super amazing people. And this video that we had at the beginning of the meeting, trying to wrap this up, allowed us to be able to see who these amazing people are. So thank you to that. One operational thing that I'm hoping that we could look at is it's well known in the private security business that you can act like a private security. You don't have to be certified, because some people are not going to check it. Most people are not going to check it unless there's a complaint, and all you have to do is hide back in the corner and be a private security officer, professional, and get your minimum wage or whatever wage. So I think that this is a conversation I have had with quite a few folks here, and this is an ongoing thing in this new world, that somehow let's work to get to that regular enforcement. I know that we are having some enforcement, and thank you, by the way, for getting out there in some of these festivals and the private security companies that they're not so good, and all they are is a liability. What we have with folks that are just pretending to be private security officers or professionals, and that did sound sarcastic, and it was meant sarcastic, is that they're a high risk for the business owner or operator. And we know that the person hiring the entity is responsible to make sure that they've got their entity licensure in place. And sometimes the entity licensed company doesn't always check the human. They bring them on because they need to scrap for somebody who is certified. So that goes down to then, a lot of these folks running around with these outfits from 511, and they're saying, yeah, I'm security, come hire me on. It's happening. They walk in with all their gear and say, I'm private security, and somebody hires them. So it goes to enforcement. If we think that we can get there in time, I'd like to see more enforcement statewide on our 19,000 folks, 25,000 folks. I know that we're working on the entities. Let's try to get to the line level folks as well. We can look at, I think, check me if I'm wrong, I think that we can have municipalities given the opportunity to be able to, if they can check the DPS, their PSID, and then if they are not certified, then they can enforce it. How about those folks that don't have any PSID? I think the statute and rule is silent on that. That's a question. So thank you to everybody. And if there's time, can we address that one question?
Sure. There's 4 minutes left, Dan. So, yes, it's the individual providing private security services without a certification. So they don't have to have an actual PSID number for law enforcement to cite that individual. But we have had conversations with law enforcement just about what that individual is doing, making sure that, I guess I can use like OLCC as an example. You know, they go out to a bar and they see somebody at the entrance of a bar, and whether or not they can truly determine, is that person actually providing private security services, or are they just checking ID? So just educating our partners into what to look for before they're actually citing these individuals for working without certification out there in the field. So yeah, they have the ability to do that. Yes, yeah.
So Michael, is the entity then fined as well?
So Michael holds out for the record. So that would be a violation case for a provider operating, and that would go to Carissa first. However, if we do get a complaint about a company that has not been licensed, it will come to us first, so that we can get after the company about getting their entity license, and then it goes to Carissa for the violation of the provider, which is.
And boy, Carissa gets on it.
And I do have the ability to go after the individual and the employer.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to and thank you all for all the pieces and parts that y'all put in there. And I think Jeremy, I think we answered that question. So thank you. Having been involved with all y'all for quite a few years, quite many years, and working with some of y'all on a regular basis, I can't say how much I appreciate y'all. And with 3 minutes left, I think that we can give that back to everybody.
Thank you very much. And again, I want to say thank you to everybody for participating today. Hopefully you learned something new at least today, or got a question answered today, or confident we'll come back to you with some more information at a later time. So again, thank you, and you guys have a great holiday. We will be back with you, I believe it's February 18th. Is that correct? February 18th. So need anything in between now and then, you know where to find us all, and you know what we're all doing. So you can find the right person. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.